Previously on the American Justice Podcast.
Can you tell me what kind of relationship or what kind of parents were your parents?
The best.
Were they?
Honestly, I can honestly say, in my 19 years of, being with my parents, that, they were always there with us, always.
Okay.
And, if I was at a horse show or I needed them at 3 a.m. to wake up, because if I got into a bind, money-wise, anything like that, they're there. And anybody that knows my parents in my town or knows me knows that, me, my parents, and my sister are, they wouldn't have to second-guess my parents' decisions on anything. So,
okay.
I don't know if words could explain, what my parents were. I have, not one of my friends has parents like that.
There is an epidemic in America's criminal justice system: the prosecution and conviction of innocent people for crimes they did not commit. Welcome to American Justice. The American Justice Podcast Army works to free men and women wronged by the criminal justice system. It's not only about the innocent who have been imprisoned, but also the victims of the crimes as well. No one deserves justice more than them. And now, here's your host, Scott Pogensy.
Hello, American Justice Army. Welcome back to your podcast. When we left off last week, we were just starting to get into the arrest warrant. When Brandon and his family left the Hunt County Criminal Justice Center, Brandon was irritated but hopeful. He was hoping that the Texas lawman he just left would do a complete and thorough investigation. After all, they just promised him that they would check out his alibis. They just told him that they would go back and check the phone records and the toll records. Oh, and that reminds me. You may have heard me mention the toll records a few times now. The reason we didn't cover them very much is because they were outside of that 9:30 to 11 p.m. time frame that the prosecution theorized Brandon killed his parents. Even Ralph Guerrero himself says, quote, "All the toll records after that is confirming his story. But what happens after 9:30 to 10:30 is not really in question." End quote. There are a couple transactions the day before the murders, but really there's only one the night of the murders themselves. It's at 11:13 p.m., and it shows Brandon exiting the ramp right next to Alex Ruley's house. Just one more example that shows that Brandon was telling the truth. So after the Woodruff family left the Hunt County building, they headed back to Arkansas. Then, as soon as Ranger Collins smiled as the family walked away, he immediately turned back around and headed down the hallway to begin writing what would eventually end Brandon's life as he knew it. He went to start on the arrest warrant. So much for checking out alibis, huh? So much for looking at the phone records or the toll records. So much for making absolutely sure that you have the right guy. Here's how Ranger Collins describes the process.
Ranger Collins, Investigative Report, Sections 5.1 and 5.2. On Monday, 10/24/05, Ranger Sergeant Collins met with Hunt County District Attorney Duncan Thomas to discuss the progress of this investigation and to have Thomas review the facts contained in the affidavit for the arrest warrant of Brandon Woodruff. Ranger Sergeant Collins also coordinated with the United States Marshal's Service, with members of the Hunt County Sheriff's Office, and with Texas Ranger Sergeant J. Womack out of the Texarkana office to plan for the execution of the arrest warrant on Brandon Woodruff once the warrant was issued. On Monday, 10/24/05, at approximately 9:35 a.m., arrest warrants number 3199X and number 3200X, each for capital murder, were issued by Justice of the Peace Kenneth Peters, ordering the arrest of Brandon Dale Woodruff. Ranger Sergeant Collins notified others who were in Texarkana that the warrants had been issued, and at approximately 11:45 a.m. on Monday, 10/24/05, Brandon Woodruff was taken into custody without incident at a residence located in Texarkana, Arkansas.
All right, so let's hear how Brandon described that morning. I would say let's hear how he described the worst morning of his life, but since that fateful day, there would be many days that pale in comparison to being arrested for something you did not do. Maybe, if we have time later on in the season, we'll have Brandon describe what prison has been like for him. But that will be towards the end. For now, here's how he says things went down when he was taken into custody.
Initially, the feeling of just the mere arrest, it was really shocking to me. I was actually asleep at my aunt's house, and I woke up, and to this day, it's almost like a haze, because it was like I couldn't even believe it. I woke up, and there was police everywhere, and it was almost like what you see on TV, the SWAT team, and I was like, it was a big just ruckus, and they told me that they were charging me with the death of my parents, and I was just like, no, and it's like the louder I got, the more they didn't listen, and I was thrown in the county jail with $1 million bond. My grandmother tried repeatedly to bond me out, and it just couldn't. She never could get nowhere with it. I mean, it was like one hurdle after another, and so I would listen to my attorneys that were appointed to me, and I would try to do, what they asked, what their recommendations were, but ultimately I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I know that I'm innocent, and I know in my heart that I didn't do this, but it's like, how do you prove something like that when, the odds are stacked? You've got a whole big group on one side saying, you did this, and you didn't do it. You did not do it. So you're like, well, wait, but they're not listening. So you just feel like you're talking to a wall. And it's really hard, because it's like nobody believes you. And so you really just don't know what to do. But you just try any avenue that you can. You try to write to free attorneys. You try to ask for pro bono help. You try just to try to get the word out there.
So, there you have it. Brandon Dale Woodruff is arrested and charged with capital murder in the deaths of his parents. The reasoning? It's a basic criminal investigation checklist, or, as I will now refer to it from here on out, the Ranger Sergeant Jeffrey Collins Top 10 list. Before we get into explaining the arrest warrant, I want to play the text of it for you. While you're listening to it, I want you to do a mental exercise. Every time that Ranger Collins lists something as a reason for arresting Brandon, I want you to think to yourself, does that actually show that Brandon killed his parents? You're about to hear things such as Mike Etherington said Brandon threw a baby kitten off the bridge and things like that. I mean, after all, isn't that all an arrest affidavit is? Just a list of reasons why you, the police officer in charge, feel like the person you want to deprive of his liberty is guilty of the crime you want to arrest them for? The last time I heard, arrest warrants were not for listing your favorite baseball team or the best place you've ever vacationed. You're basically here, standing in front of a judge, saying to him or her, "Judge, I want to arrest Mr. Somebody, and the reason I want to arrest him is because we can prove he committed this crime." There is no word limit on it. There's no space restriction. So you basically just throw everything in there that you think proves your suspect did the crime you're wanting to charge them with. Okay, with that said, Let's listen to the reasons that Ranger Collins had for arresting Brandon for capital murder. Don't forget to make your little mental tick marks every time you hear something that proves Brandon had a hand in his parents' murders. Here you go.
State of Texas affidavit for arrest warrant, County of Hunt. Before me, the undersigned authority, on this day personally appeared the undersigned affiant, who, after being by me duly sworn, on oath, stated, "My name is Sergeant Jeffrey T. Collins, and I am employed by the Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas Ranger Division 1. The affiant have good reason and do believe that on or about the 16th day of October A.D. 2005, one Brandon Dale Woodruff, a white male, did then and there in Hunt County, Texas, commit the offense of capital murder, a violation of Section 19.03A7 of the Texas Penal Code, capital felony. Affiant's belief is based on the following facts and information which affiant received from affiant's personal investigation of this alleged offense. Through his investigation, affiant learned that the son of Dennis and Norma Woodruff, identified as Brandon Dale Woodruff, had spent the weekend at the above residence on weekend leave from Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas. Brandon Woodruff stated to deputies that he had left the residence between the hours of 6 and 7 p.m. on Sunday, October 16, 2005, returning to Abilene Christian University. The investigation determined that the mother of Norma Woodruff had made phone contact with Norma Woodruff at approximately 9 p.m. on October 16, 2005. The daughter of Dennis and Norma Woodruff, Charla Woodruff, had attempted to call Dennis and Norma Woodruff at approximately 11 p.m. on October 16, 2005, and received no answer. The last known contact anyone had with Norma Woodruff was the 9 p.m. phone call on October 16, 2005. Your affiant received information from a former neighbor of the Woodruffs when the Woodruffs lived at 608 Lawrence, Heath, Rockwall County, Texas. The neighbor reported that between 10 and 11 p.m. on October 16, 2005, he observed Brandon Woodruff arrive at 608 Lawrence in Heath in a vehicle known to the neighbor to have been driven by Brandon Woodruff. Your affiant has observed that distance between the crime scene and 608 Lawrence is less than 20 miles. Your affiant observed that this distance and time frame was inconsistent with Brandon Woodruff's statement that he left the Hunt County residence between 6 and 7 p.m. and traveled to Abilene, Texas. Your affiant met with Michelle Lee, the mother of Brandon Woodruff's girlfriend. Michelle Lee reported that a .45 caliber long Colt had been displayed in a trophy room of the residence and had been stolen along with ammunition for the weapon. That weapon was discovered to be missing on October 17, 2005. Michelle Lee confirmed that Brandon Woodruff had been in the residence many times and had knowledge of the weapon. Michelle Lee stated that Brandon Woodruff was last at the residence on Saturday, October 15, 2005. Your affiant observed that the ammunition for the long Colt was consistent with the projectiles retrieved from the bodies of Dennis and Norma Woodruff, as well as the crime scene. Michelle Lee also stated that several weeks ago, Brandon Woodruff had called her and said that he was afraid he had, quote, screwed up, unquote, with school, and he wasn't sure if he should be there. Michelle Lee also stated that Brandon Woodruff had missed curfew so many times since the beginning of the semester at Abilene Christian University that he would receive an academic dismissal if he missed curfew again. Affiant knows that Brandon Woodruff missed curfew on October 16, 2005. Michelle Lee and Michael Etherington, a former classmate and friend of Brandon Woodruff, both expressed concerns to investigators in reference to the mysterious deaths of several animals, including a horse, dogs, and lamb in Brandon Woodruff's care. Etherington also informed investigators that he had personal knowledge of Brandon Woodruff striking a mother cat in the head with a shovel in order to kill her and then dropping her kittens from an overpass. Michael Etherington stated to investigators that on a web page utilized by Brandon Woodruff stated that he, quote, hated his fucking parents and wished that they were fucking dead, unquote. Etherington went on to state that Brandon Woodruff indicated on the web page that his parents were losers and never did anything for him. Investigators were able to locate said web page and discovered a survey reportedly filled out by Brandon Woodruff that included the question, quote, "Do you get along with your parents?" unquote, to which investigators observed the answer to that question as, quote, "All the time, LOL. No, really, I love them," unquote. While investigators were reviewing the survey, Etherington called and advised that the entry about Brandon Woodruff's parents had been recently changed from what Michael Etherington told investigators to what was currently in the survey. According to Etherington, Brandon Woodruff must have changed entries which are displayed via the internet on website myspace.com concerning incriminating comments about a strained relationship between himself and his parents. On October 23, 2005, Affiant conducted interviews with both Charla Woodruff and Brandon Woodruff, the children of the victims, in the presence of their attorneys. During the interview of Charla Woodruff, Affiant was told of, quote, borderline, unquote, physical abuse and of strained relationships between the parents and the children. Charla Woodruff stated that she was forced by Brandon Woodruff to lie to their parents continually while they were growing up in order to cover up Brandon Woodruff's misbehavior, and that Brandon Woodruff would physically abuse her with a horsewhip. Charla Woodruff also told Affiant that Brandon Woodruff is currently on probation for disorderly conduct stemming from a fight in Rockwall County. Charla Woodruff also indicated that Dennis Woodruff underwent electroshock therapy when she was a child for anger management and his explosive temper. Charla Woodruff indicated that Brandon Woodruff inherited her father's temperament. During the interview of Brandon Woodruff, he claimed no abuse or strained relationship existed between any of the family members, in disagreement with the statement made by Charla Woodruff. Brandon Woodruff provided Affiant a timeline inconsistent with the times provided by the neighbor in Heath, described earlier in this exhibit, and claimed that he was in the area of Plano and downtown Dallas, when the neighbor claims he observed Brandon Woodruff at the residence in Heath. Based on the facts listed above, Affiant believes that enough probable cause exists for the issuance of an arrest warrant for Brandon Woodruff for the offense of capital murder for the deaths of Norma and Dennis Woodruff. Jeffrey T. Collins, Affiant, subscribed and sworn before me on this, the 24th day of October A.D. 2005, Kenneth Peters, Magistrate, Hunt County, Texas.
Well, there you have it. That's the arrest warrant. That's all of the reasons that Ranger Collins had for depriving Brandon of the rest of his life as a free man. So how many mental tick marks did you have? How many times did you think to yourself, yep, that right there proves Brandon did it? I know we're a little early in the episode, but I'm about to go unchained. So I think it's time that we have a patent-pending Scott Pogency personal opinion. It seems to me that if you're going to arrest someone for something as serious as capital murder, you had better be damn sure that you have the right guy. Ranger Collins may or may not have been an experienced investigator. I haven't had a chance yet to go back and research his background, but as a Texas peace officer, one would assume that he knew the punishment range for capital murder was anywhere from life in prison without the possibility of parole to the death penalty. So he had to know when he was arresting Brandon that he was probably, in all likelihood, depriving Brandon of his liberty for the rest of his life. A lot of times, police officers will use the excuse, well, my job is only to make the arrest, and it's the prosecutor's job to prove that he did it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, would be what we in Texas like to call bullshit. When I first got into true crime, I would watch any and every program there was out there. And I remember very specifically on one of the shows, an attorney said, quote, 95% of the cases that get charged are pled out. And of the 5% that go to trial, 95% of those are found guilty. End quote. I think most of you probably know that's pretty much true, even if you didn't know the actual numbers. Whenever there's a not guilty verdict, it makes the news. I can only think, really, of a handful. So with those odds, Ranger Collins had to have known that his arrest would be permanent, and Brandon would most likely never see the outside of a jail cell again. And that's the case whether or not Brandon actually did it. Think about it this way. Do you really believe that 99.9% of the people in this country that are charged with a crime are actually guilty? When I ask most people how many inmates in the United States prison are actually guilty, most tell me around 90%. Well, even at 90%, that's still a hell of a lot of people that are innocent and in prison. So all I'm saying is that Ranger Collins should have made for 100% sure that Brandon was guilty before he filled out an arrest affidavit, especially one with such opinion and hearsay as you just heard. I don't know about you, but I didn't hear one thing in that arrest warrant that proved, or really even suggested, that Brandon was guilty of the crime itself. I heard that he may have been doing bad in school, but if all the college kids that were doing bad in their freshman year killed their parents, we wouldn't have any parents left. One of the other things that Ranger Collins said in the arrest warrant was that there was a gun missing and that Brandon had access to it. You know what he didn't say? That the gun was displayed on a shelf and anyone in the house just walking by had access to it. He also didn't say that, by all accounts, from everyone that knew the boy, and Brandon himself, he didn't even know how to operate a gun. You know what else he didn't say? He didn't say that Brandon told the truth about all the places that he went that night, but he was just off on one of the times. He didn't say that Brandon was very unsure of the times a lot of the time and asked Ranger Collins to go back and look at the records. Lots and lots of things that Ranger Collins knew that pointed to Brandon's innocence, but he just left out. I understand that an arrest warrant is supposed to be a document saying why you feel like someone is guilty and why they committed the crime that you're wanting to charge. But it's also supposed to be a document that gives the judge, who in most cases is hearing about the investigation for the very first time, a true bird's eye view of the information that you have been able to gather in the investigation itself. I mean, imagine this. Imagine during a police officer's investigation, he found out that there was an eyewitness that saw a guy running out of a hotel room where a woman had just been raped. Seems pretty open and shut, right? What happens if also during the investigation, he found out that the witness who saw the man was 50 feet away and was not wearing their glasses? And then he ran the DNA sample and it turns out that it was actually someone else other than his suspect. Would he still present an arrest warrant to take the guy that the eyewitness picked out into custody? How much trouble would he be in if he presented that to a judge and didn't tell him about the DNA stuff or the part about the witness not wearing glasses? We have basically the same thing here. You have a police officer that is doing nothing more than presenting hearsay and character assassination in an arrest affidavit, and leaving out any information that shows that he's innocent. In my opinion, this was the sloppiest and most thinly veiled arrest warrant I have ever seen. And I've seen a lot. Okay, so back to the contents of the arrest warrant. let's talk about each individual item that Ranger Collins lists, or, as I said earlier, my Ranger Sergeant Jeffrey Collins top 10 list. Here we go. Reason number 1. The murders were personal. All the attacks were aimed at the neck and throat of the victims, leading them to believe that the suspect was enraged at Dennis and Norma Woodruff. Any time spent during a psychological criminal profiling course will reveal that killers will attempt to mutilate the facial areas of the victims they personally know. Psychologically, mutilation to the face erases any personal association between the perpetrator and the victims. But then again, I've watched enough Walking Dead episodes to where I personally automatically aim for the head region whenever I visit a gun range. It's the only way to ensure a true zombie kill. If I were a deranged killer, and for the record I'm not, I wouldn't want one of my victims to get back up and bash in my skull from behind while I was rummaging through their belongings in another room because I wasn't thorough enough to shoot them somewhere vital. Now, while the attacks very well could have been personal, the last time I checked, the Woodruffs knew lots of people, personally. The only thing that this proves, or suggests I should say, because it really doesn't prove anything. I mean, does it suggest it was personal? Yes. Does it prove it? No, obviously not. But the only thing that this suggests is that it was somebody that they knew. Sure, that circle could include Brandon, of course, because he's their son. But they also had a daughter. They also had brothers and sisters. They also had lots of people that they knew through 4-H and the like. I would venture to say that as long as it's not a random act of robbery or a drug deal gone bad, it's probably going to be personal. Okay, reason number 2. The murderer felt comfortable. Through the use of luminol, it was discovered that there was a trail of blood leading from the living room area to the bathroom and the front bedroom. Also, what they thought was blood was found in both the sink and the shower and on the floor in the bathroom. This led the investigators to believe that Dennis and Norma's killer or killers possessed little worry being caught as he, she, or they cleaned themselves up after the act was committed. Still, it was late enough in the evening and the Woodruffs lived in the country. It was doubtful that anyone heard the shots in order to come and investigate the source of the disturbance, since it is indeed, quote, the country. It isn't uncommon for residents in a rural community to hear a stray gunshot here and there throughout the night. They barely even raise an eyebrow to it most of the time. Is it also doubtful that family or friends would be visiting at such an hour? I mean, why get in a hurry? This is also one of the reasons that my theory has developed that the killers had to come back the next night and spend so much time cleaning the bathroom. As we'll talk about when we get into the crime scene during trial, the luminol, quote, hid on blood in the bathroom sink, bathtub, and floor. It turned out that apparently bleach also makes luminol light up, and that was exactly what happened in this case. What the investigators originally thought was blood turned out to be bleach. Again, on the floor, the sink, and the bathtub. As we discussed during Brandon's timeline, someone spent a significant amount of time cleaning up that bathroom. Luminol showed bleach all over the bathroom, which would lead one to believe that there was initially blood all over the bathroom as well. Okay, reason number 3. Brandon was the last person to see Dennis and Norma Woodruff alive, or at least the last one to see them alive who'd accepted an invitation to Ranger Collins' interview room. It was common knowledge that Brandon stayed the weekend with his parents while he was away from school in Abilene. So it's not in question that Brandon was the last one that we knew about to see the Woodruffs alive. But as we discussed before, if Ranger Collins would have actually taken the time to get the phone records first, he would know that Brandon was not anywhere close to the Royce City house when the Woodruffs were last known to be alive. But then again, Ranger Collins has not shown a propensity thus far for waiting for the evidence to come in before drawing a disastrous conclusion. All right, reason number 4. The neighbor to the Heath house, Randall Lunds, who had sworn to watch the home in the family's absence, who isn't even named in the arrest warrant and couldn't even remember the names of Dennis and Norma or Brandon, stated that he witnessed Brandon at the home between the hours of 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on the night of the murders. Collins goes on to say in this section of the affidavit that Brandon claimed to be on his way back to school in Abilene between the hours of 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. that night. Now, if you've been paying attention in previous episodes, this is a bold-faced lie. Regardless of any discrepancies in the timeline, we heard Brandon's own voice describe his whereabouts during that time frame, and Collins was indeed present throughout the interview. Brandon told Ranger Collins all of the places that he went and the times that he remembered to the best of his abilities. But if you'll remember, those times included meeting up with Robert around 9 p.m., getting over to Alex's house around 11 p.m., getting to the club around midnight, and ultimately leaving back to Abilene around 1:30 or 2 a.m. In case you don't remember that, let me play it for you again. And as you'll hear, Ranger Collins is definitely present and accounted for. Here it is.
You left Heath about 8 p.m. on Sunday, and you met Robert Martinez, but not in Denton. You met him at...
Well, I don't know where we were. It was at a Denny's. Like, I kept calling him on the phone because, like, I didn't know where they were at, and they didn't know where I was at, and I was like, well...
But it was off of Central?
It was off of 75.
75?
Near Royal. Because I just remember him saying, well, we see Royal. It was, like, over there by the Galleria. Mm-hmm. Like, they saw the Galleria, and there's, like, a Denny's.
Okay. Okay. I mean, that's like 635 and 635, I think, and you were 75.
635, so I don't know.
Okay. All right. But y'all went to Denny's and you just met there. You didn't get out and go to eat anything, and then you went straight up to Plano to Alex's house, and you got ready at his house. And then what time do y'all think y'all left Alex's house to go
to the club?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think like 11:15.
No, 11.
We were trying to get there before 12. I know that.
Well, is that when the dance thing was?
It was at 12.
It was at 12.
They started at 12. So like we always like to go, but like we always like to hang out for like an hour or something before.
Sure.
That's just what guys and friends do. Like.
And what was the name of the club?
S4.
Best 4?
S.
Oh, S4. And that's in Dallas? Is that like in the West End area, or where is that in Dallas?
I don't even know.
You don't?
No, because they were like Alex showed me how to get there. Because I was with Alex, James, Robert, and me.
All right, so there you have it. Ranger Collins not only lied by omission in his arrest affidavit, but lied by making statements that were just flat out not true. Remember the definition of a lie that we discussed several episodes back, and I told you to remember that definition? Well, here's where it comes in. A person lies when they say something that is not true with the intent to deceive. While yes, it's difficult to get inside of someone's head to definitively determine their true intent. I'm pretty sure someone telling you something and then you turning right around and displaying it as something different just a few minutes later is as close to definitive as you can get. Remember, Brandon just told Ranger Collins that he went to Denny's and he went to the club and left Dallas around 1:30 or 2 a.m., just a few minutes prior to Ranger Collins stating that Brandon said he went back to Abilene at 6:30 or 7. Brandon said nothing of the sort. And shame on Ranger Collins for lying to a magistrate judge in order to secure an arrest for someone that had no proof of guilt. Being off on your timeline after telling the big bad lawman that you weren't sure multiple times is not proof of guilt. I don't care who you are. So, do you see where this arrest warrant is going? Here's a hint. It doesn't get any better from here. Okay, moving on. Reason number 5, the missing gun from the Lee household. Michelle Lee stated that she had noticed the .45 long Colt missing on October 17th. This was the day after the suspected murders. Also, the spent ammunition discovered at the crime scene of the murders was consistent with the type used in the missing weapon. Lots of guns take that type of ammunition. Several people were in and out of the Lee's home and had access to the missing weapon as well. We will get into this much deeper when we cover Michelle Lee's interview in the next week's episode. But let's just suffice it to say that it had been over a year since they actually laid eyes on that gun. It sat on a shelf in a room rarely traveled and loaded. Yep, they left a loaded gun sitting on a shelf for anyone to see or take or use to kill 2 loving people. It has been widely accepted that the Lee's gun was actually used to kill Dennis and Norma. Was it proven? No. But accepted? Yes. The problem is that there were lots of other people that were in the house unsupervised, including the shit-kickers themselves, Mike Etherington and Joe Hageman. Of course, Ranger Collins didn't include that in the arrest warrant. Oh, I can't wait to cover all that next week. Okay, let's get back to the arrest warrant. Reason number 6 in the Ranger Sergeant Jeffrey Collins top 10 list? Brandon stated that he was not going back to school in Abilene and had no intentions of returning to the Rockwall, Hunt County area. In all fairness, why would he? His parents were dead, and all of his high school friends had turned on him. His childhood home was now filled with nothing but painful memories. Why go back? Also, how many people listening to this podcast moved away from their childhood home, said they would never go back, and then, by some unforeseen circumstance, ended up moving back? How many of your friends brought this to your attention, and when you finally arrived back home, they refused to let you live it down? People say things during times of heightened emotion, extreme decisions in uncertain times. Can you imagine anything that you ever said in a period of uncertainty that it could be used against you as a fact in a murder investigation? The problem with this paragraph, or reason, is that Ranger Collins made it out to be like Brandon was being secretive and was planning on running away to become a fugitive of justice. He stated that Michelle Lee told him that Brandon wasn't going back to school or sticking around. However, the way it really happened was Brandon told Ranger Collins that he wasn't planning on sticking around Rockwall or going back to school. In other words, Brandon was saying that he was staying away from the Rockwall area and school just because life was too difficult to emotionally deal with right now. But he did tell Ranger Collins that if he needed him to come back to assist with the investigation, or give any additional information, he'd be happy to. Here's what Brandon told Ranger Collins mere minutes before this arrest affidavit was started.
Are you going to stick around?
I don't know
what are you going to be. What are your plans? Because ACU is expensive.
Here's the deal. I've talked to my dean. I have no plans on going down there for at least about a week.
Okay.
Or two, or I don't know. I've got a lot. Like anything in that dorm is mine. My roommate has his. I'm talking about as far as the TV entertainment system.
All that's yours.
That's all mine. So I've got a lot of the stuff.
You've got to go get that stuff.
That I need to go. And I need to talk about what I'm going to do this semester and next semester. I was going to go back to, I think they're going back to Arkansas, and I don't know if I'm going with them. I think I am tonight.
Okay.
However, I've got also, as soon as y'all let me know whatever, y'all are through or whatever, you know what I'm saying? As soon as I know something, I'm planning on going to Bentonville for a while with one of my hands.
Okay. And
just chilling, because I want to get out of Rockwall and get out of Texarkana. Because when you have two families that are, you know what I'm saying, me and my sister both, we don't know what to do. We have all these decisions to make. We've got a broken piece of glass here. We don't know which piece to pick up.
I understand.
And I need to be there for my sister, but at the same time, we're not making any decisions right now as far as anything goes, because that can all wait. Right now, I just need to get away. She does too, and but I don't want to go haul myself to Bentonville with my aunt and uncle, and then y'all call me the next day and say you need to drive 10 or 11 hours down here. Do you know what I'm saying?
And I do understand exactly what you're saying.
Because they all came down here today. We were going to try to get as much stuff as we can done at the houses that we could, and I haven't even been to the old house.
Well, and I understand that, and again, that's why we're trying to take care of all this today. So, because I don't know where y'all are going to go tonight, but hopefully if you're not done, you're not going to be going all the way back.
Well, I know at least a lot of them will be. If there is a need for us to stay, then I have plenty of places I can stay.
Reason number 7. Brandon was having trouble in school. He had stated to Michelle Lee that he was worried about failing out of school and that his missing curfew so many times was certain to get him expelled. On the weekend in question, Brandon missed curfew again. By this logic, every teenager I've ever met, including myself, is a potential murder suspect. In fact, as you heard, Ranger Collins says in the arrest warrant that, quote, "Affiant knows that Brandon Woodruff missed curfew on October 16, 2005, end quote. Oh, really? How do you know that? Because Brandon just told him that he had an exception for that weekend. Brandon was very transparent with Ranger Collins and told him, quote, like Friday, you have to tell them that I'm checking out or I'm checking in for the weekend. You can't have either or. But if you check out, you can only check out until Sunday. But my dad had called and made an exception for me and Robert, and he took responsibility for Robert." End quote. So once again, Ranger Collins misrepresented the truth in a sworn affidavit. Will it never end? Nope. Well, not yet. Moving on to number 8. Brandon was violent towards animals. Both Michael Etherington and Michelle Lee claimed to have knowledge of Brandon abusing animals. Of course, this was all completely hearsay, and none of it was ever investigated. So it really has no business being in a, quote, affidavit of fact. It's more like an affidavit of hearsay and character assassination at this point. But here's the thing. Ranger Collins says that, quote, Michelle Lee and Michael Etherington both expressed concerns to investigators in reference to the mysterious deaths of several animals, to include a horse, dogs, and a lamb in Brandon Woodruff's care. End quote. That would lead one reading this to believe that they both expressed concern that Brandon was responsible for those deaths, when in reality, Michelle Lee actually expressed concern that Mike Etherington was the one that killed those animals. Not to mention Aunts Kathy and Linda expressing the same opinion as well. None of them expressed any concern that Brandon was responsible for the deaths, except, well, yep, you guessed it, Mike Etherington. Ranger Collins at this point is manipulating and bending the truth so bad, we may be able to turn it into a pretzel before long. Does anyone have any salt? All right. Reason number 9. We're getting to the juicy stuff now. Michael Etherington claimed that Brandon Woodruff had changed his answers on a MySpace survey involving his feelings about his parents. At one time, Etherington stated that Brandon said he, quote, hated his fucking parents and wished they were fucking dead, end quote. When the investigators actually took time to view the MySpace page, they saw that it stated that he loved his parents. We'll get into this much more when we cover Mike Etherington's interview in a few weeks, but basically, Mike has represented to the Ranger and his loyal lapdogs, Terry Jones and Joel Gibson, that he personally saw the MySpace page, when in reality, Mike never actually saw it. But then, after what he told the investigators turned out to not be true, you would think at that point Mike would say, you know what, guys? I actually didn't see it. Maybe it didn't say that. But he didn't. He doubled down and told Ranger Collins that it had been changed. It was this reason that Ranger Collins felt justified in including this information in the arrest warrant. Well, that plus he didn't really have much more. I mean, who cares if it was accurate or not? It sure does sound salacious, no? Sounds like something a killer would say, right? Right. Let's just stick it in there. But once again, Ranger Collins is just taking Mike Etherington's statements at face value, putting nothing but speculative trust into his words or believability. But yes, don't miss that episode. It's going to be a good one. All right, we finally reached reason number 10. Charla's statements regarding the family dynamic. According to Charla's interview, her father and brother were abusive to her, and Brandon had asked that she lie for him several times during their upbringing. Her statements were also taken at face value, and her history of mental instability was never brought into consideration. Most investigators I know or have had the pleasure of talking to have all told me that they take the person's character and credibility into consideration as much as the words that they're saying. I mean, think about it this way. If someone with a rap sheet a mile long tells you something as opposed to, let's say, a doctor, which one would you believe more? Personally, I'm trusting the one with the medical degree. With all of that said, just the fact that the next line was even included in this arrest affidavit literally left me speechless. Quote, Charla Woodruff also indicated that Dennis Woodruff underwent electroshock therapy when she was a child for anger management and his explosive temper. Charla Woodruff indicated that Brandon Woodruff inherited their father's temper. End quote. Are you kidding me? First of all, electroshock therapy, or ECT as it's commonly referred to, is not used for anger management. It can be used in treating anger attacks stemming from bipolar disorder or depression, but it is not used or approved by the American Psychiatric Association as a frontline treatment for, quote, having a bad temper. I'm surprised Ranger Collins didn't know that since, as we learned in past episodes, he thought he had his medical degree already. Second of all, Charla just told Ranger Collins during her interview that she had all kinds of problems with her dad and her own mental stability. Did he not take into account the credibility or motivation of his interviewee as she was spouting off her malicious attacks at her father? I mean, come on, man. Even if you believed Charla, how does this have anything to do with putting Brandon at the scene of the crime? Speaking of that, we're now done with the Ranger Sergeant Jeffrey Collins top 10 list. Did you mentally count to yourself how many of them you felt like actually put Brandon at the scene of the crime? Did you count up how many of those reasons actually indicated that Brandon was the one that committed this specific crime? I understand how someone could read this arrest warrant and think to themselves, wow, Brandon is really not a nice person. But how in the world can anyone read this affidavit and think Brandon had anything to do with killing his parents? It just amazes me. Always has, always will. These 10 reasons were full of nothing but speculation, circumstance, and character assassination. There's absolutely no physical evidence whatsoever. Mix this with how Brandon's description of his family's lifestyle differed from that of his sisters, and the fact that his timeline on the day in question differed from that of the forgetful neighbor, and you have a recipe for life in prison. This just basically proves that this particular scenario could happen to anyone within earshot of this podcast. Your civil rights and liberty could be taken away, and you could rot away in a cell for all of eternity because you don't get along with old friends or certain members of your family. It's that simple. As we close here, I want you to know that I know how much it sounds like I'm ripping this arrest warrant a new one. But I only am doing that to warn all of you that if an arrest affidavit like this can get drafted by a police officer, signed off on by a judge against Brandon, then it can very easily happen to you too. The information contained in this government sworn document is barely enough to arrest Brandon for having a bad haircut, let alone for capital murder. I hope everyone takes this information with them to bed tonight and ponders on it. Maybe even listen to the episode again. Maybe you missed something. I can assure you, you didn't. And I don't mean to give you too much of a spoiler, but they don't use much more than this at trial. They pretty much use this as a game plan for convicting Brandon Dale Woodruff of capital murder and sending him to prison for the rest of his natural life. Next week, we'll cover Michelle Lee's interview on the same afternoon that Brandon is arrested. And then, after that, the next day, Mike Etherington, shit kicker number 1, jumps into the Ranger Collins hot seat to tell him all about why Ranger Collins got the right guy and should not be looking his way. Here's a little preview. And remember, everyone, to stay aware, stay strong, and get involved. See you next week.
Morgan ran into a guy at Walmart. His name, I don't know. Starts with an R.
Okay.
And he said, and he's different. And he said,
Different in what way?
My God, Morgan, I guess you know, Brady's out of the closet. And Morgan's like, shut up. Well, Morgan was with Mike and Perry up at Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
And Morgan says, he's a flamer, and everybody at school knows he's gay, and he's just gay. And he said, I ran into Brandon at the such and such, and he was with this guy, and they were locked up. And Morgan's like, you're so full of shit. And he's like, I went right up to Brandon and I said, Brandon, I knew you were a flamer. And Brandon said, you did not see me here, and if you say you did, I will deny it. So do with that whatever you want.
The American Justice Podcast is owned and copyrighted by Atua Productions, LLC. Your host is Scott Pogensey, and your writer is C. Derick Miller. The theme music for the American Justice Podcast has been created and composed by Josh DeRosa. Scripted and recorded episodes are published every Sunday morning, with follow-up Q&A episodes released on Fridays. You can find the Q&A episodes on YouTube by searching for American Justice Podcast. Atua Productions aims for this to be an interactive podcast where you, the audience, has a great amount of influence on the content of our shows. You can interact with us in several ways. First, and most preferred, is you can leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 972-942-0444. Be sure to leave your name and the city you're calling from, along with whether or not we can use your voice on the air. If Facebook is more your style, you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Feel free to leave a comment, or you can message us on Messenger if you have a more pressing question or issue. If you would like to blog about the show, then you can log on to AmericanJusticePodcast.com and tell us what you think there. If you are a tweeter, you can also voice your opinion on Twitter at @AJusticePodcast. If you would like to support the show, you can do so in a couple different ways. First, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/AJPodcast. We have different levels of support that include t-shirts, guest call-in spots, and early access to our podcast and YouTube shows. Next, you can like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get notifications of when we publish episodes. We would also very much appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review. If you have any comments about the show, or more importantly, any tips on the case we're discussing, please call 972-942-0444 and leave us a message. After all, if the subject of our podcast is innocent, that means someone out there is guilty. American Justice Army? Let's find them.